Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk. It's on weird game dev jobs and how to get them. Basically, a lot of thoughts about career stuff. I will be asking you to help me out by shouting stuff out at specific times in this talk, so I would encourage you to not feel shy. Your neighbors will not judge you. You can turn your badge inside out if you want to make sure they don't know your name. My name's Patrick Miller. I'm a designer and a community manager at Radiant Entertainment. You can follow me on Twitter at PatTheFlip. I think a lot about game dev and careers and the industry as a system that takes people in and hopefully routes them to the right kind of work. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I have to remind you, silence your dang phones, and please fill out the email evaluations, because if you really like me, then I can come back. And if you don't, then you can tell GDC that. So first, some questions. I'd like to get to know the audience a little bit. So I want you to raise your hands. You can raise just one if you like. If you're a student or you're a new dev and you haven't yet really worked in a paid role on a game yet. Cool. All right, this talk is going to be excellent for you guys. All right, so put them down. Now raise your hands if you're currently working on a game in a full-time paid capacity. And I want you to keep your hands up. Cool, okay, so still some of you in here. And out of you with your hands up now, how many of you are working on a game that is the kind of game that you got in the industry to make? All right, now how many of you guys are indies? Yeah, good luck, guys. But that's kind of the challenge, right, is that when you're just breaking into the industry, the first step you ask yourself is, or actually when you're trying to break in, the first step is, how do I get my first job? And it can take people a long time before they get to the job they actually want, right? And if that doesn't sound like weird game dev, well, we're going to get there. Because the fact is that all game jobs are kind of weird. This is a super bizarre industry. It basically didn't exist until a few decades ago. And not only are the jobs we do on games weird, but the path you take to get there are often weirder still, right? I suspect that this is probably because making games requires a lot of different kinds of skills, and they're specialized skills, right? Every part of game dev is every bit as professional as being a doctor or a lawyer or working in any kind of skilled trade or working in other kinds of software engineering, right? Or creative fields like comics, art, film, right? But we don't have that many trade schools. We don't have that many specific programs, right? Like, unlike other professional fields. And so there's no one clear pipeline into the industry, right? Even the QA climb that you usually hear, right? That's pretty rare these days, at least from what I personally have noticed in my time in the industry. Some people do start out in QA and then move on to other roles, if they see a better fit there elsewhere. But that's far from standard. Right, so I thought I'd put together this talk to kind of highlight the weird, right? The weird paths that we take to get into this industry, in the hopes that it might change the way you think about how you break into the industry, how you get your start in games, and then once you've gotten your start, how you end up with the role working on the game that you actually wanted to make, right? Because that's super rare. It's super hard to find those gigs. And I think that if you change the way you think about it, then it'll make it easier for you to figure out how to get there. So one example is me. I work for a studio called Radiant Entertainment, and it was founded by enterprise software developers. They worked at VMware and Microsoft. Some of my coworkers' backgrounds include fine art, insurance regulatory software, Lego, and we even have a philosophy PhD. He's the lead game designer on our games, right? None of that sounds like a traditional game dev path. And it was actually when I was talking to the ex-philosophy PhD, and his name's Seth Killian, you may have heard of him. He pointed out that weird is kind of normal for game development roles. That weird is, the weird path ends up being how all of us got there. So first, I'm going to talk about me. If y'all don't know me, Patrick Miller. My title is game designer / kind of community manager. As of last week, I no longer have a community to manage. It's a long story. But based off of this, right, so if you saw my Twitter account or if you saw my business card or something, right, you see my resume because I'm applying for a job with you guys, what would you think my resume looks like, right? School or previous jobs? Well, I'll walk you through some highlights. I also studied philosophy, got a BA at Pitzer College. And then before I was doing game design and community management, I'll just walk you through like a quick reverse cron list. I was the editor-in-chief of LeagueOfLegends.com for Riot Games. That's the website they use to publish League. Before that, I was the editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine. Then print died, and I couldn't do much about that. Before that, I was a how-tos editor for PC World Magazine. Before that, I was the assistant boxing coach at the East Oakland Boxing Association. Okay, that's a little weird. right? I wrote a book on how to play fighting games. Teaches people how to play Street Fighter. It's free. You can download it. It's on PDF. It's called From Master to Master. I recommend it, but I wrote it, so what do I know? But so all of this is weird, right? All of this is not a typical path into game development, right? I didn't go to school for it. I have nothing in the way of like technical skills or even hard creative skills like art or music. But there's a story here, right? All of these are jobs that work, one, with some kind of online content, right, like text or video, usually, right? It's not until the latter chunk of the career that you get into working directly on the games. It's all about teaching people how to do stuff, whether it's that stuff is punching people in the face or reinstall Windows. That's a really popular one, by the way. Teaching people how to make games as the editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine. Like, that was kind of weird because I didn't even really know how to make games, but I found a lot of smart people who could and got them to write about it, right? And even the League of Legends stuff, like a lot of it was curating content for the League website to better teach our players, right? So there's kind of a story here that makes sense when you start to think about it the way that I want you to think about it, which is I teach people how to get better at things, and often those things are competitive. So this sounds super corny, but your career is a story too. I need you to bear with me for this. So most people think that a resume says, quote, I am good at making games. And when you apply to a job or you're trying to get a role on this team that you really like, that's what you're trying to tell them. It's like, I'm super good at making video games, and I want to work with you guys so we can make really cool video games. The problem is that if that's all your resume says, then you're competing with everyone else whose resume says the same thing. And in that competition, it's very hard to be the best. Some of you, probably most of you, are not the best. Right? Even if it's just the application pool that they're looking at, it's hard to be the best at a thing. And really, when we're hiring for these roles, very rarely is anyone looking for someone who's just good at making games. We're usually hiring for someone who's good at making the specific kind of game that we're working on, right? So when I think of the job application process, when I think of your career or my career, ultimately my goal is to tell a story that should communicate how I ended up being good at the specific thing that you're looking for. And so to highlight the weird here, we're going to try this. So this is where I need your help. We're going to go through some short career stories, some major milestones in careers from people in game dev. So many people have spoken here, some friends of mine, et cetera. And there's going to be one missing step. And so as I read it out, I want you guys to just shout out your guess for what the missing step is. And in the rare case that you actually know what the answer is, I want you to shout it out anyway, because I guarantee you, no one else is going to say that thing. Okay? Sound good? Y'all ready? Yeah. Sweet. Okay, cool. Oop. Yeah. So this is the thing. I should also mention, it's a hard game, so if the talk does well, I'll consider a balance patch, but like I said, this stuff is super weird. So we'll start with Frank Cifaldi. He just gave a great talk the other day. He started out at he started a website called Lost Levels that's devoted to tracking down and documenting unreleased games, especially focusing on Nintendo and kind of earlier retro stuff. Then he worked at GameTap, and his role was kind of dovetailing with game preservation, among other things. From there, he worked as an editor at 1UP. From there, after that, he worked as an editor at Llama. There's kind of some ping-ponging around there. What do you think he does now?
What's the digital ocean?
Close. You almost got the name right. Anything else? What kind of games do you think he's working on? Sweet. Man, you know him and you didn't even get it right. Brandon, dang. So he's a game designer for Other Ocean Interactive. He shipped NBA Rush, which is kind of like a temple running game using the NBA IP, which is kind of cool. He's the only designer who's done a Sharknado game, which is pretty rad. But he also shipped Mega Man Legacy Collection, which if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's basically a really cool kind of updating and repackaging of a lot of Mega Man games. So that kind of makes sense. But you never thought that that's how he would have got there, right? My friend Felix Kramer. So they went back to school, I think in their like late 20s, to learn how to become a programmer. Then dropped out and played a lot of Super Hexagon. After that, played a lot of Pikmin 3 at Indie House Vancouver. Then realized that the Towerfall dev, Matt Thorson, didn't really have a marketing plan, so they did PR for Towerfall. What do you think they're doing now? You guys are really bad at playing this game. It's okay. Cool. PR and production for Iron Galaxy and a bunch of indies. Recently worked on games that have shipped or have about to be shipped, including Oxenfree. Shout out to Oxenfree, I really like that. Butt Sniffin' Pugs, Video Ball, and Capsule Force, right? So again, this is not a job that anyone would ever teach you exists, and they wouldn't teach you how to get there. But when you look at the end point, the story kind of makes sense. A friend of mine at almost gave you the answer. Geoff Moore. Started with a 1-year unpaid internship with Habitat for Humanity, then worked at fraud detection for a cell phone company, started a bunch of failed web startups, that one's kind of rough, and then worked on Teach with Portals. It's a program that helps school teachers work with Portal 2 to teach lessons around like game design and math and physics and stuff like that. What do you think he does now? I really wish he was working on the Windjammers revival. That would have been cool. He's a product manager at Riot Games. So again, I mean, it's not really till the end that you even get to game stuff, but you get to he built all these foundational skills that got him there, right? Tanya Short started as an unpaid production intern for a month for, quote, some indie working out of his house. Never heard of that studio before. Then a marketing intern for 42 Entertainment, where she called 10,000 payphone numbers for the I Love B alternate reality promo campaign for Halo 2. I don't know if any of you guys checked that out, but that was super neat. I had no idea they had to call 10,000 payphones for that. That was super gnarly. After that, got some level design experience in a master's program, and then started as an AI designer for Funcom on Age of Conan. What do you think she's doing now? So someone guessed over here, she's co-founder of her own studio, Kit Fox Games. They do Moon Hunters and Shattered Planet. And that one actually is super trippy to me because there's nothing else in that story that says, oh, she's going to go found a studio, but that's exactly what she did. Kate Compton didn't actually play games growing up. They majored in media studies, right, with a little programming on the side. After that, did some kind of informational design and tech studies. That's, she described it as kind of just combining art with code. And this next one actually I think will make a lot of sense, but you're never going to guess it. User experience is a good one. Got an internship making special effects on Spore, right? Makes sense, but what? Okay, yeah. You made the planets too. Sweet, thank you. All right, some of y'all may know games writer Cara Ellison. We kind of know what she's up to now. I'll walk through that in a second, but her origin point was actually pretty neat. So step 2 was she contributed for Rock, Paper, Shotgun. She was a writer there and did a whole lot of freelancing. She made a really cool Twine game called Sacrilege. She kickstarted a book called Embed with Games, and now she's doing narrative design stuff. I think she most recently worked on some Dishonored 2 stuff. How do you think she started? Thank you. Someone boo this man. All right. QA tester for Rockstar North, right? Why Rockstar North? Because they were just right next door to where she was living, right? That's pretty cool. And it's actually the weirdest path out of QA that I've ever seen. This one was another one that I hit up on Twitter. Andrew Allen, aka Dr. Llama, is the starting point that's kind of the weirdest here. So eventually he worked on a PhD in avant-garde music, a PhD in computer music, and now works in physics-based game audio. What do you think was the starting point? I've actually worked with a lot of ex-lawyers. That's a good guess. There are a lot of ex-lawyers in game dev, which is tough because law school debts are not funny. He was a classical tuba player. What? Richard Lord, so dance school, from dance school to choreography, from choreography to museum installations, from museum installations to educational CD-ROMs. What do you think he does now? I like mocap is a pretty good one. He's a programmer at EA. That's actually, that's weird because it's not weird. Katherine Walker, this one was good. Studied classical Mongolian religion in college, then did internet marketing, then studied 3D art. What do you think she's doing now? Cool. So yeah, audio is actually a reasonable guess given all the other weird paths. I heard a lot of game writer. Game writer of sorts, she's a story associate producer at Bungie, right? So when you think about some of the stuff Bungie's doing, yeah, I could see Mongolian religion actually coming in to be super useful when you're world building and stuff like that. That's cool stuff. So that's enough of the game. Thank you for being my first QA group, by the way. I'd like to give you all a round of applause. There's some other stories in there. I found a guy who worked on military training sims, and now he works on the Frostbite engine, and that makes total sense, but again, you wouldn't think that would happen. Someone got all of his experience at an illegal gambling company, but where he worked in customer support and then QA and then build and release management, and all of those are super useful and probably more legal in games. Someone who worked on MIDI controllers and audio software, and then, of course, you just wrap some fun game stuff on that, and you got a game. And there were a lot of people who just started like making a thing, right? They made art or music or whatever, and a dev team noticed it and liked it enough to bring them in-house to make more of that thing. So those are some super weird jobs, right? Those are not jobs that you necessarily think about when you're sitting there, especially if you're in school or whatever, and you're sitting about how to thinking about trying to break into the industry, right? So how do we get them? Well, This is kind of the talk that I give everyone who I've ever managed. So if I managed you and you're here now, thanks for showing up. I'm sorry, this is a rehash. The way I think of this stuff is that you can't really make opportunities happen, right? Opportunities as they exist in the world will, they're not always entirely within your control, right? Let's say I want to make a game, and it's a certain kind of game. I really like fighting games, so that's the kind of stuff I want to work on. But fighting games as a genre, like, they come and go, right? They've got their booms and busts. So if I'm trying to get a job on a fighting game and a studio just laid off like 300 fighting game developers or something, I'm probably screwed, right? That opportunity or the lack of opportunity has nothing to do with me. But what I can do is I can improve my story, right? The story that the resume tells. I can make myself the right person for those opportunities to happen. And there are kind of 4 things that I think about when I'm going through the job application process or whatever that help me do that, right? That help me be the right person for when an opportunity comes by. 1 is to figure out your story. 2 is to get good at your things. 3 is to make the kind of stuff you want to make. And 4 is to find the people who are already doing the stuff you want to do. So we'll go into a little more detail on that. To start with, and this should be fun for all of us because as game developers, we're used to thinking about characters and stories, right? Your specific story beats will be pretty hard to predict, right? You can think of it as kind of like some of the stuff is procedurally generated, right? And you probably won't have that much control over those beats. If we go through all those people that we just went through in the slides earlier and tried to guess those milestones, they probably never saw each of those steps coming. In part because, as I said earlier, they depend on a lot of different factors that they have no control over. But you do get to control the general direction of the story. So mine is about teaching and competing and different kinds of text and video content through different media. What's your story? I want you to think about it a little bit. What is your character arc? What's the general trajectory that you want to pick out? And in order to flesh that out, I asked myself a few different questions. So one is, what's your backstory, right? Where are you coming from? In my case, even though the game dev stuff is relatively recent, I have a history of 1, playing a lot of fighting games, and 2, also doing actual martial arts. And a lot of that stuff, curiously, when I'm able to describe it the right way, is very relevant for the kind of stuff we work on in any kind of competitive game, right? So you want to know where you're coming from. And if you think about you as a game character for a minute, if you don't know where you're coming from, you're going to have a hard time getting anyone who's reading your resume to care. Second thing is, what's your cause? What motivates you, right? In my case, I used to be a competitor, and that motivated me, and then I kind of fell out. But I got really into the act of teaching and of seeing other people go through similar journeys. And that journey could be, here's how to not lose a boxing match. It could be, here's how to reinstall Windows, or here's how to get more out of your PC. Or it could be stuff about your interaction with League of Legends or any other of the games that I've worked on, right? But you have to figure out what motivates you. In my case, it is the desire to teach, right? And in teaching, be a part of someone else's journey. Third thing is, what's your goal, right? So what do you want to do or make or be, and who has the job that you want, right? And when I say who has the job that you want, I don't mean, oh, I want to make the next Call of Duty. I want to be the creative director on that, and this dude over here is the creative director on Call of Duty. I actually, one of my main sources of career inspiration is stand-up comedian and UFC commentator Joe Rogan, which is, again, kind of strange. And I'm actually not a huge fan of a lot of his content, but it's really cool that he more or less gets paid to be himself and be smart and talk. And sometimes he's smart and he talks on his podcast. Sometimes he's funny, and so he gets up and does the stand-up comedian thing. Sometimes he commentates the UFC, and he's smart in a different context. But his job is just to be Joe Rogan. I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. Not many jobs like that in games now, but that could be something that I work for in time, right? So I want you to start thinking about that too. And looking outside of games is actually a good way to do that. Next is, ask yourself who your mentors are. Who did you train under? Right? And so this is something which, in martial arts, we have the concept of a lineage. So I learned how to, I do a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I can walk you through the story of the different instructors I've been through. And if you know what's up, then you can kind of piece together an understanding of who I am, who I came from, what my style is, right? In my case, for games, my mentor is Brandon Sheffield. He's the guy who organized most of this track. He's sitting over there looking like a super cool guy. He'll be up next to tell you about how he almost bankrupted his studio. So excellent mentor. But if I can communicate that, and if I can integrate that into my story, then that helps tell people who know what's up where I'm coming from, right? So in my case, Brandon did a lot of foundational work on Insert Credit, which was an early games journalism publication that was super rad. And I ran into it when I was still writing about games a little bit in a freelance capacity, but was kind of getting disillusioned. And so I would now describe Insert Credit as mostly a bunch of insufferable hipsters, because we are, but with that comes taste, and that kind of taste actually is something that I can communicate in a job interview or in a resume or something like that, right? So that tells you something about me that's not necessarily described in the roles that I held. Next question is, what are you good at? And this is the thing that y'all are probably already thinking about the most, right? You're thinking about the skills that will get you to your goal, right? This is when you're actually signed up to make the game, what is it that you do to help actually make that game, right? So I'm sure that since all of you are here, you're probably pretty laser focused on the getting good at the stuff. But remember that getting good at the stuff is only part of your story, right? And if all of your story is just how good you are, you're going to have a hard time going up against other people in this industry who might be gunning for the same roles but have more experience or a more compelling story, right? So all of that, the answers to all those questions become the story that you tell through your resume, through your cover letter. My computer just fell asleep. Through your cover letter, through your interview and your portfolio and so on. But you need to be ready to tailor it to whoever you're telling it to, right? Because like I said, you can't pick out which milestone is going to happen next, right? You can't predict your story in advance, just the trajectory, just the overall direction. So if any of you are familiar with the pain in the ass that is doing branching narrative content, you basically have to do that for your resume and stuff, right? This is why no one likes doing branching narrative stuff, is because you have to make a whole bunch of different versions of the story that make sense to you and to the person that's reading it, and you kind of want the person who's reading it to feel like it's not branching, that the job that they're holding in your hand is the only step in that story. So the next thing, mentioned this a little bit already, but you got to get good at your thing, right? The worst thing in the world is to see that the opportunity that you want went to someone else because you weren't good enough, right? You weren't good enough at your thing. There's a lot of learning that happens on the job. Lord knows, I was really good at selling myself as a candidate for a job and then getting hired, and then on day one realizing that I had to learn a whole lot of how to actually do the job, right? And a good hiring manager will know that they're hiring for the potential, right? But the easiest way to get a job is to manage to communicate to whoever's controlling the job hiring process that you've already done that job before and it's super easy, so they should just hire you already, dang it, right? And that can be tricky. In my case, a lot of the jobs that I was doing didn't exist before they started hiring for them. Like with Riot in particular, like there aren't that many people who have run a website for a competitive game that, you know, as part of the dev and publisher, right? Something that has to work as both kind of like brochureware, but also engage the community. So when they're looking for an editor-in-chief for their website, it wasn't like there's an existing pool of candidates to draw from, right? So I had to kind of, when I was talking to them, a lot of it was trying to figure out how I could convince them that I had the competitive games experience and the relevant web content experience to be able to handle the specific needs of the League of Legends community, or of an online competitive game community, even though I hadn't really played that much League. I had to convince them that I knew how kind of the other side works, and by the other side I mean the parts of publishing content on the web that have to do with marketing, user retention, that kind of stuff, basically the stuff besides whether your content is good or not, right? But all of that is even though I learned a whole bunch on the job, right? And the fact was, it took me about a month to a month and a half to kind of get onboarded and to actually be productive. I was able to describe enough of my competency to make them think, okay, this is the closest person we can find to someone who has done this before, right? Now at entry level, obviously that's a little bit harder, but still, think about it. Every game is super weird, and this is where I get to kind of the all game jobs are weird part. When you think about it, we often compare games to film in terms of the kind of work and craft that goes into them, right? And then let's say we're doing it Fast and Furious, right, as a film. Well, you need enough people who know about cars and street racing to be able to write and create and direct and produce a compelling film, but you don't really need every single person on the team to live and breathe street racing. With games, though, because we interact with them in such a different way, you kind of need to bake that knowledge and that love of whatever it is you're making a game about, or whatever your real-world inspirations are for those games, into every single aspect of the game. And that's what I mean when I say that games are weird. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that we haven't even made games about before, and so no one has that experience. And I suspect that when we look through a lot of those people's stories as how they made it in the industry, a lot of what they're doing is getting good at something else. Because the dirty secret of games in the game industry is that we're bad at teaching people how to make video games. We don't actually know how to make video games that well ourselves, like in general, right? As an industry, we're still getting a lot better at it, right? And so paradoxically, it can be the easiest way for you to kind of find that foothold in the games industry and to get the job working on the game that you want to be making is not to start out in games, it's to go learn relevant skills somewhere else in an industry that has much better kind of onboarding and teaching and mentorship, right? Do that, and then come back to games when you find that you have the skill set to be able to contribute. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, games are super big. You know, often we need either like a couple, even if it's just a handful, like a small indie team, you need everyone on that team to have a lot of different kinds of skills, right? You need a lot of jacks of all trades. And if it's a big team, then you need to pull people in from all over all kinds of industries, right? Who have worked on some kind of specialized or obscure field that just happens to be relevant for the game you're making, right? When I talk to a lot of my coworkers at big studios or at small studios, most of them actually didn't come from games originally, right? They got their foothold in at a certain point, but for a lot of them, the job that I was working with them on was the first job that they had ever had. And like all those people that we went through, like all those stories, a lot of them just kind of fell into games because they loved games, and they couldn't find a path up through the industry, so they found something else and then jumped over. So the next thing we want to do is you want to make the kind of stuff you want to get paid to make, right? And this is kind of related to getting good at your thing. You want to make stuff that's relevant to your story and your goals, right? If you would classify the story of your career as, you know, analogous to like a monk class or a warrior class in an RPG, it doesn't really make sense to be doing mage stuff, right? So you want to make stuff that's relevant to your story and your goals, right? If at all possible, you want to start doing the work now that will get you the job working on the game that you want, whether it's a year from now or 6 years from now. Make it for free. Like, put it out there, make it for free on your free time if you have to, but try to find a way to get paid if you can. There's actually a lot of, this is kind of a tangent, but there's a lot of really cool ways that people are selling online content. Itch.io is a great store with like pay what you want stuff, and it's super supportive. Like, I'm a firm believer in everyone, just whether you write or make music or whatever, and you put stuff out there, don't be afraid to ask for some money for it. But remember, ultimately, game dev is a creative industry, and if you can't show that you can create, and specifically, if you can't show that you can create the kind of stuff that you want to be making, you're going to have a hard time getting opportunities, right? Again, I think that this stuff is probably the most intuitive for y'all in this room, because it's easy for us to focus, like as people who love games, it's easy for us to focus on the craft, right? And it's not so easy for us to focus on the narrative surrounding the craft. The last thing I wanted to recommend is find the people who are doing the thing you want to do, right? In my case, it was Brandon, and it was Joe Rogan. I still have not found Joe Rogan, but if anyone has his number, tell him to say, what's up? But this is actually something that I found super powerful when I was working with some roles or some jobs outside of games. The average level of ambition was pretty limited just in those publications. And this happened, you know, we had people from a bunch of different age ranges. There weren't that many people who were kind of young and hungry. And the institution itself that we were working in was not young and hungry. It was actually a magazine that's older than I am, right? And so when I started working with Brandon on Game Developer Magazine, one of the things that I discovered was as soon as I followed like 300 game devs on Twitter, whether they were amateurs or hobbyists or people have been doing this for 20 or 30 years and everyone in between, as soon as I followed all those people and started seeing like what they talk about, what they think about, the kind of work they're doing and how often they're doing it, how they think about their work and how they talk about their work as well, it changed my own expectations. All of a sudden I started thinking, oh man, this person are doing some really cool stuff, and I will probably never get to do something that cool, but maybe if I could do something a little bit kind of cool, that would be enough to at least start a conversation about the stuff that I can do, right, and the stuff that I'm interested in. That was kind of basically why I wrote the book on fighting games, of all things. It wasn't because I thought that there was a lucrative market for fighting game instructionals. It was more just because I wanted to show that I could make a thing and get it out there. And the kind of caveat I have to this advice is don't be thirsty. And what I mean by that is if you are approaching people who are making the things that you like, that you want to make yourself one day, that's great. You should tell them, you should appreciate their work, you should ask for advice. But there's a limit to the kind of mentoring or the kind of advice that they're willing to give you. And the easiest way to not come off as super thirsty is to be open about making and sharing stuff yourself. Because all of a sudden you're not coming to someone that you look up to and you respect as, hey, I'm this guy who's looking to do the thing you want to do. You can say, hey, I'm this guy who, I just made this art and I thought you'd like it, right? I thought you should check it out, man. Maybe we can talk about it or something. And that changes the tone of the conversation. It's super subtle, but it's actually super important. And that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for listening. You've been a wonderful audience. And I gave you a hard time about being bad at that game. It was probably my fault because I'm the game designer on those slides. So thank you again for being my QA group. And if there are any questions, walk up to the mic and ask them. Did my hat fall off? Yeah. Aha, we have one over there. What's up, dude?
Hello, Pat. Thank you again for the talk. It was very enlightening.
Thanks for coming.
How would you feel about people who have these very weird jobs? How would they list them on a resume? Do you think you'd list like, oh, I worked at this place, and then I was also, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor, and I also did this?
I actually do list some of that stuff on my resume. What I have is, like, when you look at the resume, I have a master document with about 3 pages of things that are just every possible facet that I would ever want to describe. And then I edit from that for any given role, right? So for something like, to be honest, nowhere is ever going to hire me for my Brazilian jiu-jitsu expertise, but it's a nice thing to mention. So I might make a line of it on the resume, but I will probably bring it up in the interview if I get one.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that for the sake of your slide, before I came here, I was a biotechnology major at college.
That's awesome. So I feel compelled to mention that you were one of the people who inspired this talk, as the fact that you wrote stuff and put it out there is super inspirational, right? It doesn't matter who the heck you are, just do it and show it. Be enthusiastic in your own stuff, and that enthusiasm is contagious. Got another question?
How do you stay motivated when what you're doing is so eclectic or unmarketable? Like, I don't want to throw around judgments, but say for the sake of argument, if you happen to have a college education in Mongolian religious history, that might not be the most marketable thing ever.
I mean, I was a philosophy major, so that's the definition of unmarketable.
Yeah, let's just pick on you specifically
then.
Yeah,
bring it on, bring it on.
Yeah. Since you've got a degree that's useless, how did you stay motivated to get up in the morning?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, the fact is that very few degrees are going to get you a job, right? It's just that simple. Especially in game dev, it's super hard. Unless you're working in a specific program that's gearing you up for game development, a lot of you probably have a degree or working towards a degree that isn't directly relevant, right?
Yeah.
So then it becomes talking about, well, in my case, my education in philosophy helped me do a lot of critical thinking and deep analysis, right? And so I can show that in the other stuff that I'm doing, right? Game dev, ultimately, the most important thing is showing that you can make stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so the degree does not show anything other than I was able to suck it up and pay a lot of student loans and go through a thing that gave me a piece of paper, right? But the book says a lot more, or freelance writing, or art, or I can't do art, so God, don't ask me to do that. But yeah, the output, I think, is the most important thing. Right. Being able to talk about it is the second most important thing.
A real quick, just follow-up question then. Like, when the road's not always, even if it's arduous, if it's clear, you can put your nose to the grindstone. This is a mixed metaphor, I'm sorry. But you can keep your head down and just keep going. But if the road's windy and you don't know where you're going, like, how do you stay motivated?
Sure. I would say that the disconnect that I see is actually you feel like your stuff, oh, we're out of time. Can I just wrap this question up? Cool, thank you. The disconnect, I think, is you feel unmotivated because you think your stuff is unmarketable. And if you think your stuff is unmarketable, it's very easy to feel like kind of sad about it, right? So get better at marketing your stuff, because I guarantee you your stuff is marketable. You need to sell yourself on it, and then you can sell other people on it. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's a wrap-up room. Brandon, is there a wrap-up room? There's a wrap-up area outside if anyone has questions. Otherwise, stick around for Brandon's talk, because this can be super good. Thank you.